Hi everyone, I'm here with Sharon Press, a professor at Hamline University School of Law, who is also director of the Dispute Resolution Institute at the School of Law. And before joining the School of Law at Hamline, Professor Press was a mediator for many years and in charge of dispute resolution throughout the state of Florida for many years. But before that, in an episode of her life that many people don't know about, Professor Press spent a few years in New York City as the coordinator of a mediation program at a New York City public high school. And Sharon, you've agreed to speak with us in this course about educational mediation or mediation in the school system as one of the contexts in which mediation is practiced. Hi, and thanks so much.
Great to be here. So this is one of my real loves about mediation, and was my first job out of law school was running this mediation program in this New York City public high school, which was chosen at that time as one of the distinction of being one of the 10 worst high schools in New York City for violence in the school and suspension and dropouts. It was actually dropout prevention money that was used to this program. And I was really fortunate because I was full-time as a mediation coordinator in a school. That almost never happens anymore. Yeah. It's really, really rare. But it was a incredible experience of getting to see how firsthand, really a crash course in conflict, how conflicts escalate, how conflicts can de-escalate, and how to really step in and intervene in a way to take something off of a track that it was on. And so the idea behind peer mediation is that students themselves can be trained and serve as mediators for their peers, because they understand their peers. Right. And so it's almost like you can think about it in taking that community model of the community members serving as their peers for other community members and mediating their disputes, that it's that kind of context in the school.
So it's a kind of a specific community center, community type thing with its own special kind of flavor. And part of that special flavor being that the community members all happen to be, relatively young and at that point in their life. Right? Oh, fascinating.
Right. Young, and they also, unlike other parts of a community, the unique thing about a school, and similar to, like in an employment context, unless you are transferring from that school, you can't just decide, well, I'm going to not see that person. I will have nothing to do with them. You are in that environment, and you're going to be in that environment.
And forever, it seems like, if I remember that stage in my life.
That's right. It absolutely feels like forever, even though for many of them. But they also, and there's also this incredible history. I learned my lesson early on not to ask the question, how have you handled this kind of thing in the past, since you've known each other a long time, unless I knew that they had a good previous relationship, because I learned that sometimes the response would be, I always hated that person. We never got along, and it was always a disaster. Yeah. But sometimes the students actually could reach back to a point where they got along, or they understood each other, or had a way of working it out. So the other thing that's interesting about a school-based mediation program is that for those people who work in schools, they know this, but for those of us who don't work in schools, we're not as aware that most conflicts in school don't start huge. They don't start as gang conflicts. They start as, she rolled her eyes at me, he stepped on my white sneakers, he or she bumped into me in the hall, and then they quickly escalate because, and particularly in the school I worked in, for many of the students, they had never considered that there were other ways of resolving conflict other than fighting.
Yeah.
That if asked the question, what do you do when you have a conflict? The answer was fight. And if I were to say, what else? It was like, what? Trick question?
Right.
There is no other answer. And so
I'll just, if I can just interject, I mean, when we deal with mediation in other contexts, just to show why this is so meaningful. In other contexts, if you ask people, how do you resolve conflict at work, or how do you resolve conflict in the community or in court? So there's always a spectrum of, we go to the boss, or we talk it out, or where we throw darts, or we call it our. But it never is just that. We meet outside, or we push each other in the hallways, and that's all we know. Right. Yeah.
And so what it really illustrates is this wonderful role that a mediator has, an education role.
Yeah.
And it's education in the sense of opening people's eyes up to that there are choices that you have and ways to think about your conflict and what you want to do about it. And so peer mediation programs in schools have this incredible transformative ability in a school just by its very nature of being there, that it introduces a concept that had before been, not available, that there is an alternative to fighting. There's an alternative to ignoring and waiting until it grows so big that you want to explode, that you actually can begin to talk about it. And if you can't do it alone, then you can do it with the assistance of someone who can help you to have that conversation.
That sounds amazing. So how do you make this change happen? So you would go in and train peer mediators from students among the school? How would that look? How many? Where do they mediate?
Yeah, so I had 4 different functions that I was responsible for. So one was to train the students to be mediators. Another was to mediate and help them to mediate the disputes. A third was to do follow-up, to actually check back with the students who had made agreements in mediation to make sure that they were still holding those agreements if there was any problem with it, to address that. And then the fourth thing was to go into classrooms and to do one-time lectures or discussions or conversations with the students about conflict. And the fun thing about that last one was I could work with the teacher on whatever curriculum they were doing. Because if you think about it, history. Well, what's history?
No problem.
The story of conflict.
Right.
Literature. What is literature if not looking at conflict and resolution of conflict? Chemistry or science, catalysts, and so I could use whatever it was that they were doing and tie it to a lesson around conflict. And so that was how I began the introduction. And at those points, at the end of those discussions, I would invite students who were interested in learning more or to become mediators to contact me. Also received referrals from teachers, and the program was organized, and I think it was brilliant that it was organized this way. I didn't organize it. I was hired by someone to do this program that already was Project SMART, School Mediators Alternative Resolution Team. That we specifically identified students who were leaders, positive and negative. Yeah. So not just the students who were the A students,
no,
involved in everything, but the students who were creating the trouble and that other students looked up to, even for negative reasons.
Yes.
And once you can get some of them in and buying into it and being part of the team and mediators, people were like, oh, well, if that person is doing it, then it must be okay.
Yeah.
And then to have success with the mediations. In other words, and so even more so than in any other type of mediation, critical that the parties who are in dispute are really want that agreement, that it's their agreement.
Yeah.
because the worst thing in a school is for one person to think that they had reached an agreement and the other person to think, yeah, so who am I going to contact and when am I going to jump that person and, say, yeah, but really, no. So we really worked with the peer mediators on
nailing things down and
absolutely crystal clear. Is this really over?
Yeah.
And if there was any hesitation, it's like, no, okay.
We're not done here. Yeah.
Not done.
Okay. So could I put you on the spot to tell briefly, if you like, but a story of a situation that brought students to mediation and a bit about what that mediation looked like?
So,
I know it was a couple of years ago, and yeah.
It has been, and so many of the mediations were of the type where a student would come in to see me. Oh, and here was an important aspect of it. They didn't want to be the one who did a self-referral, although they often would self-refer.
Yeah.
But I could protect them.
Right.
So they could come in and they would say, they used to call me Ms. Mediator.
Yeah.
So, Ms. Mediator, that person, they're getting on my last nerve. They've been sort of picking at me, and I just know I'm gonna blow. And says, okay, so I'll contact them, and I will say that it was brought to my attention, which could be the teacher told me, because inevitably in a school.
Things get around. Everybody knows everything in the end. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And
since you're a grown-up, so grown-ups talk to each other and they talk to you. It's
right. That I understand that there's been, some issues with you and this other person, and are you willing to sit down and talk with them in the mediation? And generally they would say, yeah, definitely, because I don't want to fight them, but I don't know what to do.
So most of the people you tapped for this would generally say yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It would, because they really were. They were looking for an exit off that highway to the fight.
Right.
And they just didn't know how to get where that exit ramp was. And so by, just sort of flagging them over and saying, hey, it's over here, you can pause right here. That oftentimes, many of the disputes were misunderstandings. They'd sit down in mediation and they'd say, I heard you said this about me. And the other one would say, I said that, but it wasn't about you. I was talking about, the other Monique,
right.
or, whatever. And they would say, oh, so we don't have something between us? Oh, I don't even know you. And then they'd be like, okay, and the agreements, the nice thing about mediation, again, which I think is consistent probably with what you all have heard about mediation, is it's forward-looking.
Yeah.
They didn't have to say anything about what they did or didn't do in the past.
Yeah.
It could all be about, going forward, we will be respectful to each other.
Yeah.
Going forward, we won't say anything about each other's boyfriend.
Right.
Or, whatever it is that was sort of the cause, they could, at that moment,
draw a line,
eye to eye, and say, whatever happened back there, done. And here's how we're going to behave towards each other going forward.
And you say that you did follow up on these cases, which is something that in adult mediation, I don't even know what to call the rest of the mediation world now that this is a great focus for. So in the outside mediation world, follow-up is a thing that is often not conducted, both in private mediation, in court-connected mediation, in a lot of different systems. There's no there's no systematic follow-up, and many people believe that indeed follow-up isn't necessarily a part of the mediation process, because it's let parties come back to you if they want to come back to you, but if not, just assume that that they're grown-ups out there in the world doing. But you conducted follow-up, and what did follow-up look like? So would you call people into your office? Would you casually bump into them, not bump into, but yeah.
Push them down.
Yeah.
I would go to a class before or after a class and sort of be hanging around as they came out and just catch them.
Yeah.
And say, how's it going? You had this issue with someone, and oftentimes they would say to me, "Oh yeah, I forgot all about that." So it was very gratifying. Every once in a while, someone would say, "Well, I'm not so sure," and I'd offer, "Do you want to come back and re-talk about it?" Many times they would agree to do that.
That's fascinating, and it really makes me think about, again, taking this back to adult systems, whatever adult systems are, but I mean, we have systems in which there are exit ramps, as you discussed, such as in the court system, there's often an exit ramp to go to a different, but it makes me wonder about how many systems, how many arenas do we have in our lives in which we don't have exit ramps, and that if you just, build an exit ramp, we might actually get off of them, and that's I guess that's the constant challenge of mediation, to discover for itself new contexts and new arenas and new playgrounds in which people haven't considered yet. Hey, wait, but here's a conflict rife environment. Let's build an exit ramp and see what happens.
Yeah. The only other aspect I would add that was really a neat kind of piece of it was, so it really obviously benefited the students who were in the conflicts and were coming and resolving. And so there was that piece. And there was this, tenfold, or I don't know how many fold, benefit for the students who became mediators.
Yeah.
Because they became more expert in thinking about conflict in their lives and what to do about it, and in all contexts. And many of them talked beautifully about the impact it had at home, not only in school. So, how they were able to deal with their own personal life, what the impact it had. These were high school students. Many of them had jobs. The impact that it had, that they actually had these skills that they were practicing and learning, so that they weren't going to get fired from a job, because obviously if your one response is to fight, generally would mean you're fired. Right. And so there was this really wonderful benefit, and again, because of the target population of who we trained to be mediators, those students, we saw dropout rates plummet, suspension rates plummet. And then the atmosphere of the school really improved. And then, and anytime you can see, it's sort of like that spiral. You can spiral down, or you can spiral up. Right. And it was really this wonderful spiraling up. And so I've become just a firm believer in the process, and very excited about what that means for our future as these students then grow up and become those adults that then have all this. Right,
and know that there are exit ramps, and know that they can help others towards those exit ramps, and just be both ambassadors and simply real life practitioners without title of this kind of work and this kind of communication. Sharon, thanks so much. That was so heartening and interesting at the same time, and I'm sure a lot of the students out there are saying, "Huh," to themselves right now.
Thanks.
Thank you.